we go. So by way of introduction, I will say that I read Stephen's book this summer, and it was really a wonderful resource to me. I think I have it on my shelf. One second. I think it's right here. This is Teaching with Respect. And it was just a really helpful resource, Stephen. Thank you so much. So let us welcome Stephen, and we're going to proceed with our 9:25 session here at 8:30, which is Teaching with Respect, Purpose, Difference, and Community. So welcome to you, Stephen.
Hi, good morning, everybody. How are we doing today? It is so early on Central Time, so I'm gonna try and get going. Thank you, Karen, for the invitation, and thank you for the plug for the book. I'm always supposed to mention. Thank you to Hal Leonard, a publisher there. I just wanted to start, for those of us that have been teaching on Zoom for this last year or so, that I've discovered, as you probably have, that talking at someone for 50 minutes doesn't go very well. And particularly if I go to my slide deck, right? I've talked about this book a billion times in conferences, and I've got it down to like a tight hour with a huge slide deck. And what I've noticed is at the very end of it, that's when people want to talk, and the bell rings, and we have to go on to the next session. And also, I've also noticed that when I go to slide decks on Zoom, even I get bored. So I want to try something radically different today, which is I've shrunk what I needed to say to much less. And I have found as a teacher that I love the chat scrolling, right? I love putting into the chat live comments and live questions and so forth. So I've shrunk what I wanted to say down quite a bit so that we can have more unpacking of it, right? I just find that the reactions in time are more helpful in Zoom. The way when we're in the room with the student, we see them getting wiggly, we're like, I should probably transition to the next thing here. Okay, so let's test your chatting ability. Here's your first project this early in the morning. Here's the prompting question. You're at a party. You'll have to go back a year to remember what that's like, but you're at some sort of social function. And some stranger asks you what you do, and you say, oh, I'm a choir director. And then they say something mildly offensive like, why? What's your pitch? What's your 30-second pitch? What's your two-sentence pitch? Don't overthink it. Just put in the chat, and if you want to send it just as a direct message to me, that's fine. But what would you say at a party for why you're a choir director? What's your purpose? And as you're thinking about that and putting that into the chat, I'm going to give a disclaimer, a preface to the presentation here. We're going to be talking today about issues of inclusion, issues of equity, issues of representation. And I need to begin with this. I'm not an expert in any of this, right? I do not have formal training in cultural anthropology. I'm not a gender studies professor. I did not take a lot of coursework in ethnic studies or ethnomusicology. As I look back on my Bachelor of Arts in Music with an emphasis in music theory, as I look at my master and doctoral degrees in choral conducting and literature, my professional experience as an operatic and choral singer, piano training, study of French and German languages, I've arrived at this conclusion. I was exquisitely trained to conduct the Brahms Requiem. That's what my education has done an extraordinary job of training. Ironically, never conducted it. I've sung it 1,000 times, but it's usually one of my colleagues picks it before it's my opportunity. So I see your philosophies are coming into the chat, and that is fantastic. Thank you for doing that. That is where my training converges. The ability to find the hemiola and the Brahms, the ability to coach the ich laut versus the ach laut, the ability to find the secondary dominants. And I'm very grateful for that training. There are scholars, experts in gender studies, ethnomusicology, ethnic studies. I'm borrowing their work and transferring it with a new set of eyes into the domain that I inhabit, right? In my experience with these presentations, especially when I come at you fast for 60 minutes and then just close at the end of the bell, I find that some folks have never thought about really any of the stuff that I'm talking about, and it's overwhelming. I don't know if you'd remember those Maxwell commercials from the 80s when the guy's listening to the music and his hair's blowing back. It feels like that to some people, and for some people in the room, it's entirely review, and even worse, it feels like review coming from the wrong person, right? It feels like a hammer explaining to a nail why carpentry can be painful, right? So I want to clarify all those things as we get going. My focus has always been on what we can do for the human beings who show up in choir so that we can help them achieve. And I love that your philosophies are coming in here. And I'm seeing a lot of things about community and love and people, right? And helping people find their voice, connecting to other humans, introducing students to their humanity. Yes, great. I want to go back and unpack a little bit about what I was talking about in my disclaimer at the beginning. When I say that I refer to my training in the Brahms Requiem, here are things that I have learned, either explicitly, implicitly, or both. I've learned that the conductor is the captain of the ship. I've learned that the rehearsal should be action-packed from bell to bell and efficient. I've learned that the conductor should communicate primarily non-verbally, and if we must stop to use words, keep it brief, and one of those words better be in Italian, right? I mean, and this is the piece that I've really had to sit with a lot. I've learned that I'm supposed to be the expert in the room on everything that we are doing that day. I am your voice teacher, I'm your diction coach, I'm your musicologist, I'm your theorist, I'm your pedagogue. And that was something I first had to confront when I started working at a conservatory, where they're like, actually, I have a voice teacher. Actually, I have a diction coach. They're different, right? But that was not something I had learned up until that particular job. So I'm the expert in the content of the rehearsal, and my sacred role is to bring out my vision of the masterwork. I am the advocate for the composer in the room. And it is my role to wrestle a great performance out of you, my instrument, the choir. I don't have to be mean about it. I don't have to be tyrannical. I can be funny or charming or captivating. But this is the paradigm in which I feel I was really well trained. My ability to perform that role has largely paid off. I love my job. I love this school. I love the music that we make. I'm tenured at a good school, right? So I'm not throwing that out. What I want to talk about today is some of the stuff that didn't come up in my training, perhaps didn't come up in your training, and I really wish it did. So there's no problem in any of what I've just said about my background, right? Unless it doesn't align with what I would have put in the chat, right? Because if what I perform every day and what I say I do every day go like this, then I've got a problem. And that was what hit me about 4 or 5 years ago. The truth is that I respond in social circumstances quite differently than how I've always talked about my job in my mind. And they don't align. Okay? I respond by saying things like, I believe choirs teach us how to cooperate. Choirs teach us how to listen to one another, how to find your voice and share your voice, how to step up or step back as needed. And that looks a lot like yours, right? We seem to be on that same page, right? Let me see if I'm getting any other things. Bringing people together, help people finding their voice. Wow, we're on the same page there, okay? I would even go so far, sometimes I've said to a choir that I believe that someone who has sung a perfectly tuned major chord will never kill another human being. Once you feel that beatless fifth and that settled third, you recognize our interdependence. You recognize that we're all part of the same fabric of creation, right? I've gone that heady in my definition of what the work is. And yet I frame my job most days in my head as, all right, tenors, that was flat on the B flat. Don't forget to lift yourself. Altos, that wasn't even, I don't even know what to do with page 5. Everybody say selig. It's a closed vowel, right? And I go into that mode. That's what I've framed the job up here as I say with my mind, with my mouth and my heart, what my job is over here. So when I get stuck, like that moment when I realized that I was at odds with myself, I like to write letters to myself from different times, like the Time Traveler's Wife book from 10 years ago. Okay. So usually they're letters from my future self to my present self saying, Dear 2015 Steve, relax. You're fine. But sometimes I will write letters to my past self, right? Saying things that I wish I had learned. So I'd like to write a little letter to myself with you all as a way of framing this conversation. Dear past Steve, please to spend more time considering how your life might be different from other people's lives. If someone had said that to me once a day for about a year, I think I would have been a better person a lot quicker. So, dear Steve, you don't know this term yet, but you are cisgendered. You are heterosexual. You are white, and you are a man. You have seen yourself represented as the protagonist in nearly every movie, in nearly every president, every senator, representative, governor, mayor, principal, university choral director, author, scholar, artist, composer, etc. that you have studied. Dear Steve, look at your bookshelves. You have a 3-year sequence of history and philosophy from your alma mater that is lovingly called the Great Books Curriculum. And literally every author on that shelf is a white man like you. You have 3 degrees in music, and yet your only experience with African American composers was through slave spirituals, which you never unpacked from their context of slavery, and instead did as concert closers, or concert gospel music, which was usually arranged by white men. Dear Steve, you can't name any female composers beyond Hildegard of Bingen, Mendelssohn's sister Fanny, but I can't think of anything she wrote. Didn't Clara Schumann, or was, I can't remember, and did Nadia Boulanger compose or teach composing? You might want to learn some more. Dear Steve, you have never studied any Latin American, Asian, African, or indigenous composition with nearly the same level of thought as every Bach you've ever sung. You cannot name any composers from this 6/7 of the world, and it has always been programmed in the multicultural concert or as a different flavor moment in the concert. Steve, what you do not yet appreciate is that you, along with everyone else, are the inheritor of what is known as white supremacy culture. I don't mean white nationalism. I don't mean the KKK. Not the capital R racism of the Confederacy. No, I mean the waters that we are all swimming in, which continue to reinforce the most important thing we can teach is the curated works of these white men. Not that there's anything wrong with these works, but that's the only thing we are celebrating. Not that there's a secret racist committee in some Yale basement that is curating a racist agenda, but rather, over the last 400 years, that there's been a collective project to dam and reroute all of the waters so that they just happen to flow toward white men like you. And that we are, all of us, swimming in these waters, and through our teaching, reinforcing and rebuilding those dams. Now, if I had gotten that letter in 2015, I could have saved myself a lot of heartache, but I also probably would have thrown that letter out. I'm throwing this at you right now, but I had about a year to sit with these questions before I started writing, right? And I find that when I put that in a presentation, people are like, whoa, hold on, you lost me. Okay. So I want to put the race conversation on the back burner because that is the hardest thing to talk about in America. Instead, let's talk about something that everybody has an immediate and emotionally rich relationship to, which is gender. Okay? I recently asked a choral methods class that I taught what they remembered about their high school choral program. Most said, okay, well, there's a 9th, 10th grade choir. It's either like the JV SATB choir or a soprano alto 9th, 10th grade and a tenor bass 9th, 10th grade. Then you have like the elite SATB choir. And what's this choir over here, right? This is the SSA for there's just too many of you, right? The hang on for a minute soprano alto choir, right? One of the students referred to that choir. She said, oh, I was in that choir for 2 years. It was literally called Ladies in Waiting. And then there's just sort of an awkward silence in the room as we talked about that. Okay. Those girls were waiting to have a chance to sing in the SATB choir. And here's the question I want us to sit with. Why? My only answer as a teacher was, I don't know, that's how we've always done it. I was taught this model, and I taught this model with my 7th through 12th grade school. The girls in the SSA choir, frankly, were way more advanced than the 10th grade tenors that I advanced into the SATB choir just to have the right number of bodies in each voice part. They didn't know how to read yet. They had no idea what was going on with their voice, but I needed 10 tenors to balance the 10 altos, right? And then those 10 altos could all sight read everything, right? I could not at the time wrap my head around the idea that a program might have as its top ensemble sopranos and altos. There's no space in my brain 20 years ago for that, right? And I would have said the same things that most people would say. Well, the rep isn't as good. The sound is still a little bit shriller. It's not the same without that like big bass chord. You can't get all that great stuff. We've all heard all of that. We've all probably said all of that. But I want to unpack that just a little bit, okay? Why are your tenors and basses not participating at the same level? Let's unpack that. Let's sit with that for a second. Second, wouldn't it make more sense to just have whatever year the most advanced choir be the most advanced musicians, the people that are most developmentally ready for the greatest music? Hey, if those are sopranos and altos, let's run with it. I will tell you with no shame that the best choir at Lawrence is not my SATB choir, but Philip Swan's SSAA choir, Cantala, right? And if you're wondering, they've been to ACDA National several times. I've never, and I don't have any shame in that. They're a better group, right? But my students can't wrap their heads around that. Even after they sing at a national conference with Cantala, and then they think they've advanced to my group. And I'm like, well, you were better with him. I'm getting there, but like, that's a better group. Maybe 20 years ago, there wasn't as good of a repertoire, right? But you all remember, I hope, the 1998 Choral Journal article issue where Hiller Alfenstadt and Patricia O'Toole and Sandra Snow and many, many conductors came out saying, can we please stop having butterflies and rainbows repertoire? And you have seen a massive increase in outstanding substantive repertoire, right? So I can't use that excuse anymore. Here's the bigger thing. Why do you need a top choir? I've never asked myself. I've never asked myself, do we need a pyramid, right? Like, I also direct the Y'all Come choir, the so you can't read music and it's not audition, but we can still have fun choir, right? And I asked them after a year, do you guys want to identify as the crappy choir, or do you guys want to be good? Like, we can do that. We just have to frame our reference for who we are, right? Shouldn't every choir that we teach be pushed to be great? Who wants to be in a ladies in waiting choir? It literally says in waiting, right? What is your artistic goal for someday you get to sing with boys? It's like you're damning them from the start. It's like getting drafted to the Cleveland Browns. That's my Pittsburgh joke for the day. Okay. All right. I don't know how many of you are in that rivalry, but okay. So let me finish my letter to Past Steve. Dear Past Steve, teach the singers you have and teach whoever's in the room how to sound really great. You are qualified at that. Build the program around what they need to learn and grow, not around, we've always done it this way. Oh, sorry. Uh-oh. It says my computer's about to get restarted. If I'm gone, I'll come right back. I don't know why that's happening. Let's see if I can keep going. Gender is a construct. And what do I mean by that? I mean that I was taught that the world was 50% male and 50% female. That we were all born with biological sex differences, right? Sexual dimorphism. And that we assigned gender according to what your parts were when you were born. And then we identified that way, and that we performed gender that way. Sexuality we understood was different, right? But boys and girls, that's a binary. It turns out I was wrong. I had no idea. First of all, plenty of people are not born explicitly male or female. The occurrence of intersex birth, right, which we used to call hermaphroditic, right, but we use the word intersex now, is roughly as common as being redheaded. You are teaching students who are intersex. They're presenting as one gender, but that's not your business, right? But they have chosen a gender to identify with, but they are neither explicitly male nor female, right? So even just the idea that it's a heads or a tails coin toss is not actually true. Then we get into gender identity, which is a bigger project than we have time for in 50 minutes today. But we have all learned, certainly in the last 10 years of public discourse, that we are all teaching students who do not identify with the gender that was assigned to them at birth. More and more students are telling us that now, but this is not something that was invented 10 years ago. There's plenty of evidence throughout history of people not identifying with the gender that was assigned to them. It's not new, it's not a fad, right? All of which is to say, and I would say that shortly after wrapping my head around the concept of transgender identity, I learned that someone in my immediate family was transgender. Now, maybe that came after I made it clear that I understood what transgender was, and they were just waiting for me to catch up. I don't know the timeline on that, right? But it's there. It's always there, right? All of which is to say the adaptations we can make to welcome all students into choirs, to help them find their voice, to share in community, those are, in my opinion, the easiest. Those are the lowest hanging fruit. Ask students to share their preferred pronouns on the audition form. During your introductory group building games, you can sneak in what are your preferred pronouns. Things like, hi, I'm Steve, I'm a Pisces, I use he, him pronouns, I like to run, my favorite book is Things Fall Apart by Pema Chodron, right? And you just sneak it in there, right? And the reason you do that is because the student does not want to be misgendered, right? The person in my immediate family who's transgender cannot stand being on a Zoom class being misgendered 50 times a class, right? And so you could imagine that as well, right? Here's another really, really easy low-hanging fruit change. If you have like the Jefferson Lady Viking Choir or the Jefferson Women's Choir, how about the Jefferson Treble Choir? Or the Washington Men's Choir can be the Washington Bass Clef Choir, right? You've probably never only had people who identify as women in your women's choir. Or if you insisted on calling it a women's choir with the dresses, you've probably never had that awesome singer that would have joined it if there was space for them, right? I'm not emasculated by singing in a bass clef choir versus a men's choir. It does not change how I view who I am, right? I'm a man either way. But I would rather be in a choir where the woman next to me can share her gorgeous baritone voice. I created a bass clef ensemble last year, and it was fantastic. And there were singers that were amazing singers that identified as female or identified as non-binary, right? Here's the easiest of the changes, although the one that seems to get the hardest pushback. We can let go of tuxes and dresses. That one actually took me longer than it should. Like that one took me like 3 more years after I wrote the book to actually do. First of all, the dress doesn't fit on 70% of the people in your choir anyways. I don't know why we let the soprano with the size 4 pick the dress for the rest of the choir, right? But more importantly, you can just give a very simple instruction like, hey everybody, wear all black, have it be boring and modest. Imagine you're going to a great-grandparent's funeral. Those are the instructions I give my choir. And then the thing is, everyone's comfortable in what they're wearing. It still has the uniformity of not sparkles and glitter and 17 different colors, right? But I've been giving that to my university, like the Y'all Come choir, since I got here, and that's easier. Right? I would feel much more comfortable singing like this than if you put me in a cocktail dress. There's nothing wrong with the cocktail dress, it just doesn't fit my identity, right? And if I had to sing If You Love Me in a cocktail dress, I'd be worried about the cocktail dress, right? Instead of singing it well. So, dear 2015 Steve, please ask for pronouns before auditioning singers. You are about to misgender the next singer who comes into your audition, and she is going to write you a long and very thoughtful and very hurt message about how awful that was. Also, please drop the tuxes and dresses. It's part of my letter. Okay. So gender is a good gateway conversation because everybody knows everybody, right? You have, as a male, I have a loving relationship with a mom and a wife and siblings, right? And so I can immediately see how my misogyny or my sexist or patriarchal modes would affect my wife or my mom, right? But our empathy for other perspectives is maybe harder to extend if we don't know someone from that population, right? So that's where ethnicity, culture, religion, those are the issues that get harder to tackle. Because you can frankly spend your whole life without having an authentic and deep and meaningful relationship with someone from a different, from a specific population that you don't really know. So I want you to begin this mental experiment now. All right, this is your second piece of homework. When you performed your voice juries, how many of you did voice juries as like a voice primary undergrad? Okay, so I bring this up not to make you anxious anymore. Oh wow, okay, I just noticed in the chat that I sparked an NFL conversation. All right, so in the voice jury, that's I'm qualified to be a music educator through my demonstration of proficiency, right? Let's say you performed, I don't know, Fauré's Lydia, right? Okay. And you knew that all of the voice faculty knew that song. They knew its notes and rhythms. They knew how to say the French. They knew the poetry, right? They knew where it fit in the voice because they've sung it 1,000 times. They have a lived experience with Pierre Barnac, Gérard Suzet, Elie Ameling, Dalton Baldwin, and really just Belle Epoque melody, right? They know of what you're singing, okay? You are performing to culture bearers. people who are bearing that culture forward. They might not even be French, your voice teachers, right? But that doesn't actually matter in that context, because the average person in Paris doesn't know that Fauré song, right? The voice teacher is the culture bearer of this song, having been curated into how one sings Fauré, right? So you were actually appropriately nervous because you needed to show that you knew how to do it well. And this was years after studying European history. You probably took a little bit of French diction. You had weekly lessons on the song for like 15 weeks, right? You had daily practice, hopefully, right? And that's why you passed, is that you had this massive body of work with expert culture bearers. Yes, I hope you passed. Okay, you're here, right? So here's where our mental experiment's going to get uncomfortable. I want you to think of the last world music song that you've performed. I don't like that term, that's why I'm putting it in air quotes. So, song from a country outside of America, Canada, and Europe. Okay. Do you know which specific country it comes from? Do you know which specific people or region it comes from? Can you find that on a world map? Do you know what the words mean word by word? Do you know how to pronounce the text, and are you sure you know how to pronounce the text? Do you have a lived experience with its performance practice? And the answer for me 99% of the time has been nope. And so I perform it significantly less well than I would perform the Bach. Right? So everyone here has, I hope, probably a strong opinion on which keyboard instrument to use in a Bach cantata. Let me give you 5 options. Organ, harpsichord, clavichord, piano, Roland keyboard. And there's probably 3 that you are just outright dismissing, right? So that's, well, okay, well, in the Nikolai Kirche, the harpsichord might have been out of tune that week, and maybe he used the portative, right? We have a collective entrainment of such a high level on Bach, which we should. It's great, great, great music, and I absolutely love it, right? Do we know which country the djembe is originated from? And where on a map that country is? I had to look it up. It's okay. But the reason I first started looking it up is I saw it on a score for a Sanskrit text, and I was like, okay, I know the djembe doesn't originate in northern India. Like, that much I do know. Right? It doesn't mean that you can't transfer a West African drum to the South Asian continent, right? It's not saying that like things can only be this. It reminded me that I know nothing about the djembe, and I know a weird amount about Bach's keyboards. Okay, so you have your song in mind, the last world music song you've performed and conducted or sung. I want you to instead imagine performing it with your choir to a room full of those culture bearers, the way you sang the Fauré. So let's say you know the Wendell Whalen, which a lot of us have probably sung. Would you change anything about your rehearsal process if you knew in 2 weeks that a room full of Nigerian choir directors were going to be in the audience, right? And that is a question that haunts me, because I did that song without a care, right? Without any of the research that I would normally do. That's where white supremacy culture hits me right between the eyes. I have a million resources for my choir's performance of Bach, and I fly blind through other musics. But there's good news. I don't have to be the expert. You don't have to be the expert. We can call people, and I'm never thankful for a pandemic, but I am thankful for learning how to use Zoom, because now I can zoom in with a composer, I can zoom in with ethnomusicologists, I can zoom in with scholars, I can zoom in with conductors from that culture, right? You can find recordings. You can do for Betelehemu what you would do for Bach. The difference is we're already well trained on Bach, right? We're just nervous because we're always aware that Rilling's better trained on it, right? And we probably have zero training on Nigerian choral traditions and choral styles. So it's going to take actually longer to do than the Bach would. And that really blows my mind, right? That I would have to spend more time on Betelehemu. So thank you for going with me on that uncomfortable mental experiment. I'm going to share now a couple stories of me not getting it. Okay? So the first one is that after I wrote this book, I did this. I thought, okay, Steve, it's time for you to program more underrepresented works, and it's time for you to do more research. So I sharpened my pencil, and I did. I programmed part of Ernst Bloch's Sacred Service, right? Just the Kol Nidre part of it. Then I found Translations and Annotations of Choral Literature, Volume 4, Hebrew. I learned that Bloch would have said it in Ashkenazic Hebrew as opposed to Sephardic, which was the dialect that was used in the Pacific Northwest where Bloch was working. See, I felt like a choral PhD, right? I felt like I was doing all the work. I wrote in all the IPA for the Ashkenazic pronunciation. I read the articles, posted those online. I had like 6 different recordings on there. And then I started teaching the choir, and a student started getting really upset with me. And that student happened to be Ashkenazic Jewish, right? So if you're having one of these reactions of, well, Steve, you teach in one of those liberal arts colleges and kids today are just like so hyper defensive. Yeah, that was my first reaction too. Okay. But when the student and I actually sat down to talk about why he was so frustrated, it was really simple. And the conversation went like this. Dr. Sieck, do you read Hebrew? No, I don't. Right. You don't read it? You don't speak it. I do. Okay. And I actually speak Ashkenazic Hebrew. So watching you bumble through IPA of my language is really not great. Now, the background context that made the conversation worse was that before I wrote the book, when that student was younger in our curriculum, I had done the Bach St. John Passion. Yes, you should probably be catching where this is going. And I spent 0 time talking about the anti-Semitic themes in Bach's St. John Passion, right? So his first experience with me was that it's totally fine to do this work, which has been woven through the Third Reich and a variety of other experiences, right? Not that Bach was anti-Semitic, but that the work has baggage. And I never addressed the baggage, while he, for 8 weeks, learned how to scream Juden, Juden in German, right? And that was a very, very bad first impression for him. So I had already lost his trust when I then started, bumbling through a language that he actually spoke. So what he was trying to say is, Dr. Sieck, I'm actually a culture bearer here. I can help you if you let me, so we could do this song as good as we would do the Bach. So I learned from that. I gave him the floor. He took it over from there. A little late in terms of our relationship, right? Definitely a wound that he was not ready to heal, because that was on me. But I appreciated that. And you'd think I would have learned from that, but I did not. Okay. So next year, different choir. I thought, okay, underrepresented works. Bring in the scholarship, bring in culture bearers. So I programmed the Ariel Ramirez Misa Criolla, right? And I met with our Latin American Studies professor to discuss the history and threads of culture and politics in Argentinian works, which was fascinating, and I didn't know any of it. I met with one of our Spanish professors who's from Argentina, and I got him recording MP3s of how to pronounce it, because if you're not familiar, it's a very different way of saying Spanish, right? And then I downloaded a dissertation of the work, and then we Skyped in with that scholar about the history and context of the work and Ramirez's work as a folk musicologist or ethnomusicologist. And that wasn't enough, so then I Skyped in with a colleague of mine who's a choral conductor of great renown, who's also from Argentina, and sang the work with Ramirez. So I'm just getting stars everywhere for doing the right kind of work. And then we do the concert, and then I come home, and I'm like, wow, Steve, you are so woke. You are living the dream. And I get a scathing email from a Latin American student that night. And he said, in short, you don't speak Spanish. I do. You didn't grow up with these rhythms, and we could tell listening to it. I did. Your poor performance of Latin American music reflects your racist colonial perspective of this music, and I could have helped if you let me. Background. He asked if he could help, and I said, no, we've got this. Besides, you're from Mexico, and this is Argentina, and I don't know if you're aware, but those are different countries with different dialects, right? So when the student was saying, oh, this is exciting. We're doing Latinx music. I can help. And I'm going, we got this covered, right? Remember, I'm the captain of the ship. I'm the expert of all the things. And when I'm not, I find the experts. You're a 20-year-old, right? So I feel like there's something my students keep trying to tell me. On my lazy days, I want to hear it as, look, Steve, you cannot please everybody. In these hyper-woke times, there's just not going to be winning. But when I'm not lazy, I go back to my philosophy, which is not I'll tell you when you're wrong, right? My philosophy is I believe choirs teach us how to cooperate, how to listen, how to find and share your voice, how to step up or step back as needed. Yikes. This maestro model was not getting me there. So here's what I've learned after I wrote the book and all the mistakes that I've made that I'm sharing out with you. Okay. Do the research, of course. Download that dissertation. Set up that Zoom with that international expert. Yes. Contact that ethnomusicologist who studies this repertoire closely. Go ahead, write that IPA in. Give that Bach-like level of care to all the songs you teach. Second, even in the most heated arguments I had with students, they never questioned my expertise in teaching choral music. They always began with, "Oh, Dr. Sieck, I don't question your expertise in choral music. I'm just saying that you're not the expert in what it means to be black. Dr. Sieck, I'm just saying that you are not, as a German man, the expert in what it means to be Jewish." Right? And that was the piece I couldn't get past at that point in my life, is that it was okay for me to not know all of the things. I learned that if we want our students to have that safe and appropriate way to share their voice, we have to have that conversation with them, and we have to have it before we start teaching the song. Here are two things that I want to unpack from that. We want to invite students who identify as culture bearers to be participants in the creative process, but we do not want to put them on the spot. You never want to go, Yoni, you're Jewish, right? Can you teach us the Hebrew? Right. That's tokenism, that's racism, right? And I see that I continue to see that a lot, where the one black student in the choir is given the gospel solo, even if they grew up like Lutheran. And you're like, well, you know how to do that, right? That's racism, right? That's an assumption. Well, okay, since I see you as this, you probably know this, right? So you want to invite into the space room for culture bearers to participate, right? A gentle hallway conversation, a friendly email, or just an open invitation in the room. Here's what I should have said. Hi, everyone. Next concert cycle, we're going to be pouring our best work into a masterwork by Ariel Ramirez, the Misa Criolla. It's from Argentina. If you would like to help in the planning or the, where'd my notes go? Or the teaching of this work, especially if you're familiar with Argentinian Spanish or Argentinian folk music, please let me know. It turns out there was also a student in that choir from Colombia who also could have helped me way more than me bumbling through the Spanish. And I want to make sure this happens before the song cycle begins, not after the song cycle begins, right? Once you hand out the score, the ship has left the dock, right? If the song is wildly misrepresenting a person's culture, if that song has an arrangement that has a heavy white footprint, right, and an othering perspective, if the song really shouldn't be sung by this choir for this kind of a format, the student needs time to make their case and for you guys to get on board with each other, right? If you and that students talk it out and agree in advance, yeah, this song is nothing but problems from where we're looking at this right now. This would not create a community where everyone shares their voice. Better to have not done it, right? I've pulled songs in advance from those conversations, and I don't lose any sleep over the fight that we didn't have. And I don't mean fight, I mean the harm that I didn't do is probably the better way to say it. Conversely, if the student goes, oh, I see why you're concerned about that, but actually, I think if we do this, this, and this could be really exciting, and that student gets excited, now you have an advocate, right? You have a co-teacher. You have a collaborator. You have someone who is sharing their voice, stepping up in community, right? That's starting to align with what I say I want to do. The other thing I would say that I wish I'd done more of in the past was to be more flexible about my pedagogy. If I'm running the rehearsal bell to bell, highly efficient, 7 words or less, nonverbal, literacy is the king, then I'm viewing everything through one perspective, right? Some songs are better learned orally, and to teach them with written music misses the point of how that song is experienced in its original setting, right? Some songs are better learned with movement than sitting in chairs. And if the song is from a culture that most people don't know, you're not the only one who's going to need to do some learning, right? Your students are going to act out the caricature of that culture that they know, right? So I have 4 foster children, and they're African American, and one of them is obsessed with doing Egyptian dances wherever he learned that, and I'm like, yeah, that's not a thing, man. And I'm trying to explain to him that it's racist, but I'm trying to explain that to him as a white guy talking to an African American child, right? But he's just picking up the general racism of Egypt is exotic and old. Not that there are like currently a country called Egypt with current Egyptians that eat Pizza Hut and right, but just in his mind that Egypt's this thing that's 2,500 years old where they do this, and I'm like, I don't know where you learned that, but right. So I bring that little anecdote up to say that kids don't grow up in a little bubble protected from all these cultural biases, right? So if you think that there might be some implicit racism when you take out a gospel song and everyone starts making up their fake R&B runs on every song, on every like passage, that's not helping. So they need time to learn too, right? That's the educational piece of it. Once we get into this paradigm shift that I don't need to be the expert of all things, that it's not always the Brahms Requiem, it affects more than repertoire. So I can see that we're all swimming in waters that favor my identities and my repertoire. I can start to see my other biases. Here's one. I don't know if you've told yet, but I like to make a lot of dry jokes, and I've never made it through a sentence without a metaphor. Okay, I'm famously metaphorical in my language. I like to make a public rehearsal schedule on the board, and then I'll veer from it instantly. I know I'm not the only one that will make a rehearsal schedule and be like, nope, we need to spend all 50 minutes on this measure, right? So if your brain looks like mine, I have like a very Stephen Colbert sense of humor and a very Stephen Colbert sort of brain. It's a great rehearsal. If you're on the autistic spectrum, my rehearsals used to be a nightmare. Was that a joke, or did he want us to memorize all of that, right? Why aren't we on that song? He said we're going to that song, right? So I've recognized that by being a little bit more precise with my language and a little bit more predictable, students with anxiety, students with transition issues, right? And frankly, every brain does better when we know what's coming next. It doesn't mean I can't be flexible. It just means I have to specify, I said we were doing this, but I think we need to change to this instead. And just name the change instead of all the implicit things that made me feel more like I was at like a Cambridge University cocktail party, right? Where I don't need to say the thing because you understand what I meant, So I've changed that teaching language quite a bit so that more students can succeed. Again, my philosophy is not be the charming person in the room and the smart people will get it, right? That's not my choral philosophy. My choral philosophy is create a community where everyone is sharing their voice, right? As a former professional choral singer, I know the importance of superb sight reading skills, right? It gets you jobs, speeds up the learning process. I don't think we could take a poll here and say who doesn't want their choir to sight read and get anyone to be like, oh, I hate sight reading, right? I mean, it gets us right to the good stuff, right? The refining, the balance, the music, right? If your brain looks like mine and you can read and process visual information quickly, great. That's why I love it so much. That's why I got 3 degrees in it, right? If you had, for example, the privilege of a piano at home, if you had the privilege of years of private piano lessons, that's great. If you had the privilege of music camps over the summer, awesome. Guess what? People like me who had those privileges, they get into the advanced choir right away, especially if you're a tenor. Because a tenor that sight reads, that's made my career. Right? So what about the kid who lived a mile away from me, who had an equally strong passion for music, but no piano lessons, no music camps? How is she supposed to learn to read music? Oh, in choir? Well, that's my job to teach that? So if she has the same aptitude as I do, whatever that means in a post-growth mindset world, a good voice, a good ear, that kind of stuff, she's not going to be in the same choir as me freshman year, let alone the fact that, we have too many sopranos, right? Even if we ignore that, and the fact that the tenor that sight reads is like a unicorn, over the 4-year span, I'm in the choir first year, I'm a section leader by sophomore year, I'm, or junior year, and then I'm the assistant conductor, right? She's lucky to get into that choir junior or senior year by the same sort of privileges that follow. What I'm trying to say is that sight reading is an indicator of a series of interwoven skills and privileges. You could have all the privileges in the world and have dyslexia, and your sight reading score is going to be low, right? I had a student that I taught who had, I don't know if you use the ACT on the East Coast. and a 34 ACT. It'd be like a 1520 SAT, but a reading disorder. So one day in choir, I'm pontificating about the essential need for sight reading. And he comes to me afterwards and he's like, Dr. Sieck, that's really ableist. And I was like, what is ableism? I've never heard this word before. He's like, well, it's when you like give preference to certain abilities. I'm like, that sounds like life. Because at that point, I had no space for what that meant, right? And he's like, no, that means that you are oppressing people who have learning differences. And I was like, that sounds like professional choral life, right? And so I was not at all hearing what he was saying. What he was trying to say is, I'm probably smarter than you, Dr. Sieck, and if I am given time to decode the left to right in a way that works for my brain, I'm probably a better musician than you. But your ability to just take it at sight, you are privileging over all the other skills. And it was at the time, I didn't quite get it, and now I get it, right? So what I say now is that being in the top choirs used to be a sight reading based proficiency skill for me and for most choirs, right? And what I want to say is that's just a symptom, like every other symptom, right? Of what do you already know and what should I be teaching you? So I grew up in a safe, loving home with two parents, loving siblings. We weren't rich, but we didn't go hungry. The only time I ever switched from the safety of my normal life to that like fight or flight or freeze would be like, I don't know, solo backpacking in the woods and you think you hear a bear. Right? You know that feeling when this part of your brain is asleep and you're just like, I don't know if I should punch something or run or just not move. That feeling? Okay. That's the feeling that my foster kids have every morning when they wake up. Right? Because what I'm experiencing in the woods is as a threat. And what they're experiencing right now is capital T trauma. Right? Capital T. Right? So they go to school every day with their brains stuck in that mode, in survival mode. They are in fact very smart little guys, but they are not yet ready for that part of the brain to turn back on because they're still trying to make sense. It's like trying to teach the Brahms Requiem to someone who just walked out of a burning home, right? And there's ash and soot flying everywhere and lumber falling down and flames, and you're going, it's Selig, it's a closed eval, and the student's not with you that day, right? Okay, and I share all this because when I send my children to school, I'm not sending them to school and teaching them to be disrespectful or disobedient or disruptive to your classroom. I'm sending them to do the best they can in the space that they're at. And we are, all of us, teaching a lot of students with a lot of what are now called hidden disabilities, trauma, anxiety, depression, right? And if that student is not doing the best work for you, it might not have anything to do with you. The fact that they are in your room might be a heroic effort on their part, right? If one of my sons makes it through the school day without a school resource officer, that's a win. And it's a very strange bar to set, but that is a win for that boy that day, okay? And I bring that up because I would grade based on attitude and participation and things like that, without ever asking, I wonder why that student's attitude is not as sunny as the kid next to him. I wonder why that kid isn't participating the same way. I would just say, well, here's the standard, and you're down here, right? And it never occurred to me that maybe that person's parents are getting divorced this week. I wonder how active they're going to be in choral rehearsal, right? And that's not something that I ever spent a lot of time with, because once you sit with it, it can be overwhelming, right? It's too many feelings. Okay, I like to stand. I'm standing right now. I don't have cramps. I don't have tachycardial syndrome. There's 1,000 things that make standing for an hour a little easier for me than other people. So does this work? Yes. I've given my students more space to be themselves. I used to teach opera singers that are like, fine, it's an ensemble requirement. I'll be in the stupid choir. And now they're excited to be in choir, right? And it turns out all this stuff that in my old training, I needed it, right? I need to know what note you're singing, and I need to know how to sing, and I need to know how to pronounce it. It was just an incomplete toolkit. What was missing was their voices. Whew! Okay. That was me talking. I'd love to be hearing what's on your mind. Oh, and we have
Stephen, let me just interrupt for 1 second.
Okay.
And then we'll continue. Just to give everyone an update on Diana, who was presenting our 8:30 session. Diana's in Puerto Rico right now, and she's having a few connectivity issues. And so she's very sad that she's having some difficulty joining our meeting. And she wants everyone to know that she did not forget about today. So we're hopeful she'll join us a bit later. But Stephen, if you're willing,
Yeah,
I think it would be extraordinary to have an extended time of questions for you if you're willing to stay on with us.
sure.
And what we might just do, Stephen, is honor our 5-minute break here
Yeah,
from 9:22 to about 9:27, and then come back with you. Would that be okay?
I'll be here.
I love it. Thanks,
Thank you all.
everybody. All right, everyone, we're back. And Stephen, I'm just working with Diana on the phone. It looks like we might be able to have her join us after all. So go ahead and take some questions in the chat or spoken, you direct, and we'll see how things progress.
Great. Thank you all. And thanks again for joining today. I wanted to start with Valentina's question because that's a really fantastic question, right? If it's the required class for your grade and a good number of the students are like, I don't want to be in here. And I think, Valentina, am I hearing in there that there's also just like the preconception that not only do I not want to be there, but that choir somehow reflects badly on me to be in choir? Like choirs for kids that aren't good enough to be in band, or...
Yes, sorry, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, choir is where the kids who cannot be in orchestra or band go in 6th grade. So you get a mixed bag of students that may have played an instrument, so who might know how to read music, and also students who have never had a single music lesson in their lives before.
Right. So you have that huge range, and that's and a very different experience. But the Y'all Come Choir I have has seniors in instrumental music ed with perfect pitch who are doing a term of choir for a different ensemble experience, and freshmen who don't match pitch. And I'm like, okay, what are we going to do? But I think in your case, where they have to take it, right? That's where I remind myself that we're really one of the only elective parts of a student's education, right? My brother teaches high school English. Nobody chooses his class. They just have to take English. And he actually teaches the remedial sequence. So nobody's choosing his class, and they would much rather not have English, right? They'd much rather do literally anything than that, right? And I think about, well, how did my high school geometry teacher teach? Because I didn't want to take geometry. I would rather be in choir, right? Or some of those strategies there. And I think that the challenge there is that we know how awesome choir can be when everyone in the room wants to be there. But I want to suggest that, like, unless it's the St. Olaf choir, very often people don't want to be there. And that's why my allusion to my opera singers, they've actually had choir in high school and hated it because they were the ones' voice stood out and had too much vibrato and, didn't blend. So they're burned on choir by the time they come to me because they've been ostracized for having a truck of a voice, right? And so then I'm trying to resell them on the idea that choir could still be fun. But those are developmentally different ages, right? So I think, like, woven into that in 6th grade is also, like, you're developing identity and, like, am I gay if I'm in choir? And is that bad? Or, like, all the things that the kids are bringing in that we can't control. So I think even just starting with my job here is to spark an initial interest in choir, right? Because there's always if my feeder would have been better, I would have better singers, right? But we're always the feeder also. So wherever I get you, if you're a senior and this is the year in college that I spark your initial interest in choir, I'll take it. You know what I mean? So for me, it comes down more to, like, Vygotsky and, like, what's your zone of proximal development? Like, what is too hard for you and what is too easy for you? So I like to start with something that's easy for the choir, and I include this for a university choir, right? Something that they can all do well, and then go, okay, well, what's too hard? And then just try and kind of find that. Because I think everybody will, even if they're reluctant to, feel good about themselves when they're achieving something, right? So I'm just trying to find a song. And I think that the problem that I run into is that I keep thinking, well, if I find a choral arrangement of the newest song by SZA, then they're going to like that. First, like, choral arrangements of SZA shouldn't exist, don't exist, would sound bad if they existed, right? So instead of me trying to find, like, a song that they're already listening to, I'm going to find a thing that they can do really, really well, right? Because SZA does SZA songs better than we're going to do. Sorry, SZA's a contemporary artist. who doesn't write choral music. But that's for me is just going, oh, I get it. You don't know if you're going to be good at this or not, and you're afraid, right? And so I'm going to start you on something that is successful and build from there. Versus what I used to do is, here's something in 4 parts. You suck. Get out of here. Am I helping at all? I'm musing here. Valentina, I put it back to you. Has there been a song that they had some success with? Oh, okay. Yeah. And also to know that, 30 years later, I'm still not interested in geometry. But I still remember Mr. Dombrowski. He was a great teacher. He didn't make me a professional geometrist, a mathematician. But he did teach me what I needed to know in that class, and I thank him for that, right? And in the same sense that even at a conservatory, most of the people I teach are not going to sing in Skylark, right? In fact, maybe one in the next 10 years will, right? So I even understand that even in a pre-professional scenario, most of them are not actually going to be professional. So once I get rid of the idea that I'm making the defining recording of something, or that I'm training all these people to become future, professional choral directors, then it's really how can I give you a great experience today?
Hey, Stephen, I'll just pop in for a quick second and say
Please.
that we've made contact with Deanna, and she is going to be presenting for us at 9:45.
Awesome.
We have
Good.
a couple more minutes with you, and I'd like to ask a quick question if I could.
Please do. Yeah.
I've been in this scenario a few times in my career where one person in the choir is uncomfortable with a piece that I've selected. And in this most recent case, it was a piece about a pagan goddess, and the student, met me on Zoom and said, I'm a Christian, I can't sing these words. And my first instinct is to immediately pull the piece. And I just wanted to hear your perspectives on what happens when we have one or maybe two students in the choir who are uncomfortable with a piece we've chosen.
Thank you. And I've run into that multiple times as well. I think we've all probably in some form or another. So first I would say that I take maybe a hotter take on it in my book, that we're very comfortable in choir, teaching a primarily Christian repertoire to a lot of students who are not Christian. A lot of students are not. And they just sort of take for granted that in geometry you're doing geometry, and in history you're doing history, and in choir you're learning a ton about the Gospel of Matthew and Isaiah. And so I would first say that it is not an equal playing field in terms of their exposure to a variety of religions and cultures and blah, blah. Second of all, and this comes from a Supreme Court case in Abington, Pennsylvania, you cannot teach, you can teach religions, but you cannot teach religion, right? So you can sing If Ye Love Me, you can explain its context, you can explain Talus's interesting dance between the Protestant English and the Catholic Latin, and you can do all of those things, right? But you can't, reflect and pray on the Gospel of Matthew in there. So I guess with those in mind, if the students are seeing that we're not asking you to believe any of these things, but that this composer believed this, and we want to understand how their perspective was in it, in the same way that history is not saying, so therefore, as we finish our Genghis Khan, lecture, let's go take over the neighboring town, right? We're not advocating that we embody that practice. We're advocating that we learn about what that practice was. The second thing I would say is that I wish I'd had that conversation. It was the same thing. I was doing a Buddhist text, and there was a evangelical Christian who's like, I can't sing Lord Buddha. And I'm like, oh, Thich Nhat Hanh doesn't think that Buddha is a god. The Lord is like my Lord, right? It's because that's, anyways. And she's like, yep. But I never had the conversation with her ahead of time. I couldn't preemptively say, hey, in our next cycle, we'll be looking at the following texts, and let's unpack these ahead of time, right? But I think a lot of it has to do with embodied practice versus you're singing songs, right? And I think right now, both on this side of the aisle and on that side of the aisle, we take everything to mean a fully endorsed embodied practice, right? But most of the masses I've sung have not been directed by Catholic conductors. Now, I grew up Catholic, so I know what that embodied practice looks like. The conductor does not. In fact, the conductor's religion fought a bunch of wars with my religion. So acknowledging that I don't expect this Lutheran conductor to be embodying Catholic practice. Karen, I'm not sure I actually got to your question appropriately.
Actually, I think that was great. Thank you for not telling me what to do, but rather distinguishing between embodied practice and learning about, which I think was my gut sort of feeling about it. But I don't want to lose this kid in the choir, right? So I just felt, oh, I'm going to immediately pull that piece and make her feel more comfortable.
Well, and I think, yeah, I mean, I guess I would put it this way. Like, I played Captain Hook in middle school without becoming a pirate. Yeah. So I think sometimes we embody, it feels wrong. So there's the most obvious sense of like, you shouldn't perform this is like, if I put on blackface and saying a Stephen Foster song, from minstrelsy tradition, you're like, okay, there's no way you can argue that's just music, right? That's very clearly a politically charged racist act, right? And I'm sorry for even bringing it up, but just to like point out like that, we can agree is not appropriate. But we're singing this song for this curricular reason. This is a song that teaches us how to, if you're doing Moon Goddess by Jocelyn Hagan, right? This is teaching us how to count. Is that the one?
That's the one.
Yeah. And Inanna's like, if I can swear for a second, a badass goddess, right? And so there's this sense of power, right, in Inanna as a goddess, right? That you can play in that space for a little bit about how these people viewed this power of femininity, right? Versus other, religious iconography of women, right? And I think that that's always been the allure of that song, is that it's not butterflies. Like, she kicks butt, So, okay, I think I'm wrapping up here. I'll leave it.
Well, let's thank Stephen for his time with us. And I just really appreciate your amazing expertise, Stephen. I encourage you to read Stephen's book, which is really special. But thank you so much, Stephen.
Have a great day, everybody. Take care.